So, Berto, I came across an article online and I thought we should talk about it because I'm curious as to what you think about it.
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and professor.
My name is Humberto Castaneda, and I fabricate reusable lies.
So this article was on Psychology Today, written, and it's titled 5 Tips for Helping Kids Regarding Sexual Predators, written by Catherine Ramsland, PhD, because you have 2 daughters that are of that age where you should be, or maybe already have, or will in the soon future, in an age-appropriate way, talk about safety regarding predators of various different
Stranger
kinds.
danger.
Right. And it's complicated because what do you say? And how much should you say? Because you don't want to scare the crap out of them.
Of course. And even just the idea of like stranger danger, well, it turns out it's not always a stranger.
Right. It's usually not a stranger.
Yeah.
Right. So, Berto, as we go through these, in the article, they have these 5 tips, and I'll provide my own commentary on this. But think of your own kids as we go through these tips. And also another question to contemplate for yourself is, would this have helped you when you were
I was a kid?
Because you were abused by a babysitter.
Yeah.
Would these things, if your dad had talked with you about these things, would it have helped?
I mean, who talks to a 5-year-old about these things?
Or a 4-year-old.
Exactly.
And even because there's a possibility that regardless of these things having been done or not done by your dad, it might not have actually stopped it, because the chance that someone would suspect a 13-year-old teenage girl of sexually abusing a 5-year-old boy, it's not usually the profile that people are looking for when they're suspecting of a risk, even though it's clearly a risk, it happens. It happens way more than people realize.
Yeah.
So number 1, so this is from the article, teach kids about grooming behavior and the importance of telling someone if it happens. They say, be open to those who try to say they're in trouble. So be open to kids who say they're in trouble. They might not know quite how to reveal it, or might describe something that's difficult to believe, but it's important to take them seriously, so listen. But anyway, the main tip here is teach kids about grooming behavior and the importance of telling someone. That's a pretty general tip, right? But how does that apply first to your own kids?
I also don't know how the language, like the word groom. I mean, nowadays it's actually like it's used a lot, Certainly, I never heard of this term prior to, I don't know, like last 10 years maybe or something. But I'm thinking about a child, like, let's take a 5-year-old child. I think it would be really abstract to try to explain, I'm going to explain to you what grooming is.
Well, think about for your own kids.
Right.
Your kids are 11 and 6?
And 7,
7?
Yeah.
So have you, just before
I have definitely had conversations about being, body boundaries, not just me, like as a family, we've talked about body boundaries and about being able to talk to mommy or daddy about anything.
What do you say?
Well, even like with my first child, from a very early age, like when she could understand my language, so let's say 2, 3, I started telling her stories about when I was little, and I didn't tell my dad about problems, and not like sexual abuse stuff, but just when I didn't tell my dad that I got in trouble at school, or when I didn't tell my dad. And always my stories, and these weren't made up, they always ended with me being in worse situations as a result of me not trying to bring my dad into the problem. One of them is when I was I was very little. I was, I think, in 1st grade. And on the way home from school on the bus, someone was selling a Michael Jackson poster, and I had a little bit of money, and I bought it. And for some reason, I felt that I couldn't tell my dad that I had bought this poster.
This the tone and the words that you would use telling her when she's 3 years old?
I would tell her the story like this. I'd be like, and I'd add a little bit. I'd say like, so, daddy was on the bus. I was coming home from school, and then someone was selling a poster and then I would like play the song. I was like, yeah, from this, I was a big fan. And then I got home, but I was scared that my daddy would be mad. And then my little kid was like, why? I'm like, I don't know. I can't tell you. I was just scared. So when my dad asked me where I got the poster, I lied. And I said, I won it in a spelling competition. And then my dad was so proud of me. Wow, I can't believe. So I'll tell the story like this. And then I'll say, but later that night after dinner, my dad came upstairs and was like, so what words did you win with? And I had forgotten that I told him the story. So I didn't know what he was asking me. And so then he's like, Bertico, were you telling me the truth about the poster? And then I had to come clean. And then I got in trouble because I had lied. And he said, you're not in trouble because of you buying a poster. You're in trouble because you lied to me.
Yeah. So this is a great lesson regarding telling the truth in general.
Right.
Not only just lies about worries about getting in trouble, but which often victims, child victims, will worry.
Right.
Not only just because of our weird society regarding sexuality, and the way that we always talk about it in hush-hush terms, but also the perpetrator might say, don't tell your parents because you'll get in trouble, that kind of thing.
And so absolutely. And the second story is a little bit later in my life. I'm not going to tell the whole story now, but what I'll say is that this one is more about me. I could have had my dad help me with the principal at school, but instead I didn't bring him in. And as a result, I got in trouble at school and was by myself in the situation.
Yeah. So these stories are great and would potentially help a child to come forward if they felt that they were being harmed. But it's not specific. So
it's not about like,
so the boundaries, the body boundaries things, what did you say?
Yeah. So for the body boundaries, the way we've had that conversation is, so the usual thing they use nowadays is like, maybe it's, I don't know how old it is, but it's the whole bathing suit areas, right? So there's definitely been the conversations about like, hey, bathing suit areas are off limits to anyone but you, with the exception that when you're little, like mommy or daddy might help you with a diaper or stuff, but then that's about it, right? And then we've made it clear that, and it's not just like, it doesn't matter if it's an uncle or a cousin, it doesn't matter. It's like, it's your body, that's for you, right? So like we have that kind of conversation. The other one, which definitely starts getting a little weirder, and it broke my heart when I had to have this conversation, was about not everyone being a nice person, how there are people that are bad people. And when you see a little kid and you're presenting this very nice, welcoming world to them, and they see the little Disney movie or whatever, and everything's like, well, that's just in the movies, there's some bad people, but in reality, mommy, daddy, everyone's so nice. Life is really nice. And then all of a sudden, your mommy or daddy is saying, well, not everyone's nice. Because you don't watch the news yet. You don't know all the horrible things that happen. And it's kind of heartbreaking. But if you don't present that reality, then I do believe that as a child, you'll just trust implicitly in adults. Mm-hmm. And so, having that conversation, and mostly it's not about don't trust anyone. It's more about, hey, feel like mommy and daddy are people you can come to with things. But if someone else is approaching you, they don't get to tell you what to do. Now, if you're at school and the teacher tells you, hey, put your homework, put your this, that is the job of the teacher.
That's got to be really confusing to a kid, though.
Of course, but
because they're like, well, what are you saying? I don't understand what you're saying.
Because context is everything. So we give examples. Like, let's say you're at the playground and you're not at school, you're not at grandma's house, you're not at home, and someone you don't know says, hey, come with me to the car. You don't know this person. You don't have to do what they say just because they're an adult. In fact, they shouldn't, if they're a responsible adult, they shouldn't be asking you. And so we make that point about like responsible adults actually don't ask you those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And, you just cross your fingers and hope like 1% of it makes a dent. And then you don't let them off on their own all the time without supervision.
Right.
And then the rest is the world.
Yeah. Well, okay, so going back to this tip, and those are all great things.
And by the way, like I'm just saying what I do. I have no idea how effective it is, but that's what I've done. And I know that when I was a little child, I got none of that.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't a thing. People just didn't.
Would that have helped if you were told those things?
I think if my dad had had a conversation along the lines of like secrets are not like, those secrets and keeping things away from mommy and daddy, that's not okay. I think I might have, because I was someone who followed rules. I wasn't a rule breaker. Mm. So maybe, but I don't know.
Yeah, because it was so insidious, the activity, and she made you feel special, and you would worry perhaps if you did come forward and tell your dad would shut it down. Right?
Well, and also the conversation about bathing suit areas, I had also never heard of that. So no one had told me explicitly, by the way, you shouldn't be like sharing bathing suit areas with others, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe a combination of that plus you're not, if someone asks you to keep something secret, that's not a thing. Like, that's not okay. You should, you know.
What if your dad had specifically said something along the lines of, when I leave you alone with other adults or babysitters, teachers, if any of them ever want to touch you in your bathing suit area or do something that makes you feel uncomfortable, I need you to tell me right away, because that's not okay.
They're doing something that's not okay.
They're doing something that's not okay, not you.
Yeah.
And you need to tell me about it right away, because that could actually hurt you.
Dude, I can imagine. So I listened to my dad about things. So I'm not saying it's like 100%, but it might have helped.
Yeah. At least it would have been an opportunity for you to understand what a path forward. Because as you're saying this, you were saying there was zero conversation about any of this.
In fact, he was so unaware, which is surprising, right? But he was so unaware. I think culturally, people just weren't aware of these things.
Yeah.
Because when one time he found a love letter from me in second grade, a love letter from me to a little girl in second grade, where I was saying, I want to make love to you. Like a second grader it's pre-internet, right? I wouldn't have watched any shows that talked about. So it's me going like, I want to make love with you or something like that. It didn't even write it quite right, but whatever. My dad found this note and he's like, what is this? And he asked me, what do you think this means? And then I kind of played coy because I didn't want to go into the whole thing. But that's where it ended. And I'm thinking, well, that's odd. Right? But I think if we had that conversation and then something like that, then I think at the very least, maybe this could have been me going, well, actually.
Yeah. So when they have this tip here in this Psychology Today article, teach kids about grooming behavior, because the things that you're talking about with your kids are stranger danger.
Yeah.
But as we know, statistically,
grooming's not quite strangers.
Yeah. It's someone that they know. It's a teacher, a coach, a relative, an older kid, another kid, a kid their age could abuse them.
As you're mentioning this, I don't think I've actually had those conversations.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it, I mean,
what would that sound like if you talked? Do you talk with both of them at the same time?
No.
So the other thing is your older one is heading into dating age.
Yeah.
And sexuality age. Yeah. Being 11.
Right.
She's almost 12, right?
She turned 12.
Oh, she's 12.
Yeah.
So 12 and so 12 is...
That's danger.
That's right there. That's right.
Yeah.
That's where it's expected within the next...
Not my child, though. My child is not that. She won't be dealing with that till she's 25.
It's up to her. But in all likelihood,
I'm kidding,
statistically,
yes.
in the next number of years, she will be participating in sexual contact, physical contact.
Oh, man.
Voluntarily at her consensual contact with people. And that is developmentally normal and fine.
Yeah.
So how does she differentiate between I mean, I hate to do this, but a bathing suit area that is consensual and bathing suit area that is not consensual, right? Like that's a conversation that I'm sure schools are briefly discussing at the
dude, I don't know. You're making me question everything about my life. So you are right. I mean, this is part of the reason why we can't have the conversation.
Does your wife talk with him about it?
Yeah. Well, but I'm sure not enough. I'm sure not to this extent.
Yeah. I mean, your wife, God bless her, I don't know if her skill set is exactly in this area.
Exactly. So you know what? I got to rethink my strategy here, because now that I think about it, I haven't actually had the grooming conversation really with either of them, other than what I mentioned about, hey, secrets. People shouldn't be asking you to keep secrets from mommy and daddy.
So let me give you a suggestion, because you've been through it and you can modulate it for their ears. Something like this, which, because I've talked with kids about this topic clinically and personally. This is definitely your 12-year-old could handle a conversation like this. Your 7-year-old should hear something along these lines, but I'll gear it for like a 10-year-old or a 9-year-old just to kind of split the difference and say something like, so I don't know if you're going to want to talk about this, but I really, really want to talk with you about something because I love you so much and I don't want you to get hurt. And maybe you've already talked about this with other people, but it can't hurt to talk about it again. So I just need you to listen, and you can ask questions. But this is going to be, I'm going to set the timer. It's going to be a 20-minute block of time where we're going to, because you're setting up the sacred space. You're telling them this is going to be a big deal. This isn't just a minor conversation. And maybe it's you and your wife. Maybe it's all four of you. Maybe it's one-on-one, depending on the kids and their disposition. Some kids don't want to be blasted by both parents. Some kids don't care. You say, me and mommy had a talk, and it's time that you're of age now where sometimes kids like that. They're like, ooh,
you're of age where we're marrying you off for money.
They like, ooh, so this is what 10-year-olds get. I'm finally let into the inner sanctum. This is great.
I felt that way when an older, what would he be? He's like an uncle to me, but second uncle, like, cousin uncle. He let me into the information. He started telling me when I was 12, I think. He started telling me dirty jokes. And I was like, ooh. Yeah.
So
it's a dirty version of it. But
I have something to say. And there are people out there that want to hurt people sexually, physically. Yeah. I won't go into details. You can certainly ask questions, but I'll just tell you that there are some people out there. They're rare. Most people don't want to do this. The vast majority of people.
Right.
And they could be your age. They could be older, but they will want to touch you in your private area because they want to do that, and they will trick you into getting you alone with you so that they will end up hurting you and touching you. And they might even entice you with candy or privileges or money. They might make threats to you or something like this. You might not ever come across someone like this. There's a good chance you don't know a single person that's like this, but you never know.
Yeah.
This person could be a relative. It could be a teacher. It could be a friend of the family.
Right.
It could be a kid at school. It could be someone your age. It could be one of your friends. It's not likely, but it could happen. And here's how you can detect if they're one of these people.
Right.
They will gear their conversation with you and their behavior with you in a way that will get you alone. That's one, because they need
isolate you.
They need you to be alone, and they also want you to be a little defenseless and also maybe unclothed, where they can actually touch you.
Yeah.
So it would be something like they would get you into a bathroom or a bedroom.
Here, I'll help you change. Or oh, you're going in the pool. Here, let me
adjust your swimsuit or something.
Right.
And these people can be men, women, any gender, of any age.
Yeah.
You can come to me and be like, is that person going to do that to me? Is that, who's like, and we can talk about that. And I can already tell you, I'm not going to do that to you.
Right.
Because I would never want to do that. These people who do these things, there's something wrong with them. They actually want, the reason why I'm going over this bit is because we don't want the child to be paranoid about every single adult that they're around.
Yeah.
You want to delineate. You want to say, I'm not like this. Mommy's not like this. My brother isn't like this. His wife isn't like this. Kirk's not like this.
But you can look for the following 5 physical characteristics of exactly who will do it.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of ancillary or preemptive conversations to this about body and anatomy. And
but I think I'm getting your general gist, and this is arming me with tools that I can put together a strategy with my wife. And
and then you can even say, and it happened to me. I was hurt by someone. I've healed from. Now you don't have to, obviously.
No. I wouldn't do it with my 7-year-old, but I'm actually, because as I was saying, all my history with both of them, I've always tried to use examples.
Right.
And maybe now at 12, without, like you said, I'm obviously not going to go into details, but I could mention that I was vulnerable.
Yeah. The risk of that is that your child would feel overly traumatized secondarily by your story.
Right.
So you want to gauge the kid. I feel like your older one is pretty sensitive to things.
She's especially sensitive to diseases and things like that. Like if anyone talks about illness,
if you really wanted to play it safe, it would be something like this. You'd say, and this sort of happened to me when I was 5 years old. I had a babysitter who wanted to touch me down there. And I won't go into details, but
Yeah. I wish someone had this conversation with me.
I wish someone had told me, and I wish I had told my dad.
Because the walls turned black and bloody, and she turned into an alien and attacked me. Nothing that would creep her out.
But I was confused as a kid because no one ever told me what to do. I didn't know what to do.
And I felt alone about it.
I felt alone. And she, the person who hurt me, she made sure that I wouldn't tell anyone.
Right.
She told me things to prevent me from telling other people. She was the only person that was giving me any guidance. And no one suspected that she would do that to me. No one thought that the babysitter would do that to me. Now, here's the thing, Berto, is there's a chance, and I hate to put this out there, that your kids have been approached before and haven't said anything to you.
Right. Well, I mean, I was, and no one knew till I said years and years and years later.
So that's another door that you want to open. And it's like, so I want to ask you, has anyone ever given you that? Right. Has anyone ever asked you or made you feel uncomfortable or touched you or tried to touch you? You're not going to get in trouble. There's zero chance you're going to get in trouble. The other risk that I don't think your kids would do, but everyone listening out there is another thing to think about. And this is why we avoid this whole thing, because we don't want to think about any of this stuff. Your kids might have exploited other kids.
Right. Oh God. Yeah. That's horrible.
They might at this moment, the first time you bring this up, they might suddenly realize I'm
one of these people.
I'm one of those people.
Yeah.
So you have to start introducing that idea.
Yeah. Well, it's similar to bullying, right? Like, imagine you start having a conversation about bullying with with your child, and you don't realize they're currently bullying a child.
Yeah, right. But this one seems more risky because the way in which we talk about sexual predators is that they're monsters, right? And the way that they're talked about in society. And so exploitation of others, there's a spectrum between monster exploitation, a monster exploiting someone, and someone who is confused or hasn't learned what to do in situations like that, or was modeled something and repeated it, or, like with you, Berto, if your dad had come to you, say, when you were 6 or 7,
right,
or a little older, and had a conversation, there's a chance that you would have thought, wait, I've done that to some girls my age. You told a story once about how you just reached down and grabbed a girl's, you reached into her underwear.
Right.
You were just sitting in a car, I think, and just grabbed her butt, skin on skin. And she didn't like it.
Right.
And that's bathing suit area. And
right. And I was puzzled because I'm like, well, I thought that's what we do.
Right. So if your dad had that conversation with you after the fact, you might have drawn one and one together and said, wait, I am one of those people that my dad is saying could hurt. Am I a monster? So that's why we need to have these conversations age appropriate and explicitly.
I mean, I think if I had gotten that perspective, because I am someone who is, empathetic normally, but in those cases, I was completely oblivious that might be hurting someone, because I didn't realize I had been hurt. Right. So it might have been useful for me to hear it.
Right. So, I mean, best case scenario, it opens the door to have a conversation. I mean, just imagine if your dad had effectively opened the door and you take the bait and you're like, well, actually, that did happen to me. And your dad talks with you about that and says, that was wrong that what she did.
Right.
And you say, well, actually, I've done that to someone else, kind of. And he'd say, like, well, it's good that you said something. It was modeled to you. You did what was shown to you. So don't think that there's something wrong with you. You just did what you learned. It's like learning ABCs and you just repeated it. So don't think it, but know that you should never do that.
Yeah.
You should never touch someone without their consent.
And I got very lucky in that instance because the little girl, who was a little older than me, laid such a clear boundary and was so obviously not happy about that action that I really recoiled from it, thinking, "Oh, okay, I guess I'm not supposed to do that." Mm-hmm. And I feel it probably protected me for some amount of time from, like doing that more. Mm-hmm. But who knows? But yeah, I think that if my dad had had that conversation even after the fact, it would have still been helpful, even if it might have been a bit painful. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe very painful. But
yeah, the other thing I'll say before going on to the other the other 5 tips is this is extremely nuanced, and it's difficult to know exactly what to say. If we lived in a different society that wasn't so busted up about sexuality in general, this would be a lot easier. Because the information would be out there. The kids would hear it from other people. They would talk about it amongst themselves, age appropriate. We as adults wouldn't be so freaked out as we enter into a conversation around that.
Right.
I always give this example. If you have a 7-year-old who is at school and the teacher walks up to the kid and slaps the kid across the face, the kid, in all likelihood, even if the teacher says, don't tell your parents, the kid is probably going to tell their parents.
Right.
But the same teacher grooms the kid, gets them alone in a closet, and touches them. The kid is extremely unlikely to tell their parents without, just without any intervention, even with education to the kid. Because our society sends so many messages to the children, even at that age, that sexuality is shameful and those who participate in it are disgusting. Even people who are being coerced.
Or there's no messaging, right? Because like with the violence thing, from very, very young ages, you're watching TV shows where violence is not okay.
Right. Yeah. And it's often discussed.
Yeah.
The teachers will say in preschool, in kindergarten, in first grade, you do not hit other people. There's all these examples. It's out in the open. And, you could argue that that makes sense because violence is a much more common thing that's happening on the playground. But regardless, because our society is so strange, kids know, even at the age of 5, that they're not supposed to talk about that.
Yeah.
It's gross. It's disgusting, or it's not okay. There's something wrong with them that it even happened. And so if we lived in a different society, it'd be easier. But anyway, let's take a break and we get back. Let's go over the other tips. What do you say, Bert?
Let's do it.
All right, Berto, we're back from the break. The second tip here is address the topic of harmful secrets and explain that responsible adults would not ask children to do this. Make sure children know they can confide in their parents or guardians if someone, even a trusted friend, asks them to do something that disturbs them. So I think we've already covered that.
Yeah, and this one is more along the lines of what I've done, both through examples and explicit conversation.
Yeah. And I would add specifically around people touching them or wanting to touch them.
Right.
It's not just general lies.
That's the part that I think I need to double click into. But the idea, because it's hard when you're a little kid, you and your friends have all sorts of little secrets. You make secret codes. You do. So if your parents like you shouldn't be keeping secrets. It could be a confusing message.
Right.
So when we've discussed it, it's very specifically about like keeping secrets from your parents. It was part of the conversation.
Well, I might even give examples there. Like, hey, kids, we generally don't like it if you keep secrets from us for a variety of reasons, most importantly for your own safety. But there are probably some things that you will keep a secret from me, which are probably okay. For example, if your best friend tells you that they want to be an astronaut when they grow up, but they're embarrassed about it and they want you to keep it a secret from me and everyone else, then the harm of that secret isn't likely to happen, because your friend is confiding in you in something, and you don't need to tell anyone about their dreams of becoming an astronaut. That's not something that is important you tell me. But if your friend tells you about an event that happened where someone touched them in a way that made them uncomfortable, and they tell you and say, I need you to keep this secret, there's a chance that your friend would actually be better off if you did tell me that secret, because not that we would tell everyone about it, but we would actually take action to help your friend from being harmed again. Providing examples, because just saying no secrets,
right.
And this is part of the problem with a lot of the authoritarian messages that are told to kids. They will say, never lie and never have a secret and never break the rules.
Right.
and never use drugs. These kind, when you get to teenagers. And then just use don't use drugs. Drugs are bad, okay? And then as a 16-year-old kid, you're watching your parents drink alcohol, smoke weed. You're watching other people smoke cigarettes. You're watching your teachers are addicted to caffeine.
So you don't believe anything.
And you're like, wait, so it's all bullshit. Yeah. This whole thing is bullshit. Might as well smoke crack.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right.
So you need to have a nuanced conversation around these topics.
Yeah, and I think the examples are critical. I think the more we talk about the thing that I've really lacked in a lot of these conversations, a lot of it is because they were younger, but depending on what age, is the specificity around the grooming and the touching in conjunction with the secrets. Because one thing is that most often when little friends are having secrets, especially about, like random things like what they want to do or their secret codes and stuff, it's very rare they'll say, oh, and don't tell your daddy or don't tell your parents about this. Because like, why would you ask that? Right. You might just say, hey, this is between us. Whereas, and not always, but whereas, if you're a groomer and you're very aware, especially if you're older, you would probably actually specifically make sure this doesn't get back to, your daddy, let's, between us. And that's like, that should be a red flag. Mm-hmm. But to your point, examples can really go a long way too. Mm-hmm. Because same thing with not becoming paranoid about everyone. You also don't want to be like, oh, I can never hold a secret for a friend, or I can, right. That'd be ridiculous.
Right, exactly.
Counterproductive.
Yeah. Or a friend, another example, a friend of yours tells you that they peed their bed last night. Right. And they don't want anyone to know. Or they pooped their pants at school. Ha, right. ha, ha. But let's just say that happened. And they don't want you to tell anyone. That, keeping that secret, as long as there's no medical problem, but it was just an accident, keeping that secret is not necessarily going to harm you or your friend. Right. But there are some secrets that if you keep, even if people are desperately asking you to keep that secret, everyone, including your friend or whoever's telling you the secret, might be worse off if you actually keep that secret. There's some secrets that are really important that you actually tell me about. The other thing that I would tell, and I've told younger people, and really everyone, is if you tell me a sensitive secret, I want you to know that I will not immediately just blab about it or take action. We will have a conversation. I might have an impulse, if you told me, for example, that, like this is for your 12-year-old, if you told me that you or one of your friends was thinking about suicide, if they were depressed or they wanted to kill themselves, hurt themselves, if you told me about this, I'm going to tell you right away, I would have an impulse to tell their parents or to talk with mommy if it was you and get you a therapist. But I know enough to know that I need to slow down and ask you what we should do about it. I would talk with you about it. Should we go to their parents? Should we do this? I can't guarantee that I'll go along with what you want, but I'm not going to just run off and freak out and take action without us having a conversation about it. Because kids and people need to know that if they tell you that you're not going to ruin the entire situation. You know what I mean?
That's a tough one. I need to work on that because I am perceived by my children as a reactionary individual.
Like what?
Well, if daddy gets involved, like I am the disciplinary, well, not on all fronts, but on a lot of fronts. If we get to the daddy stage, man, okay, I guess I'm going to have to do the thing, So it's one of these because I don't know, I get into this mode, like no nonsense mode. So it's like, wait, if I hear something upstairs, I come up, I'm like, what's going on? I'm like, no, it's like, well, I want to know what's going on. And then, I just wanted to delay doing this thing for school. Then I'm like, no, we're doing right now, So I think maybe that creates this impression, or I'm pretty sure it creates this impression. Like as soon as daddy finds out, it's action time. and therefore
that could be worked with regardless. You could say, look, if you're worried daddy's gonna just take reactions very quickly, go ahead and tell mommy, and mommy will decide whether or not she wants to tell me. Sure, but tell one of us.
Tell one of us. And maybe I could make it explicit, like this is one area where you can trust. Right. I'm not going to go into reactionary daddy mode.
Right. Because one, I want you to know prior to, I don't want you to worry that I'm going to ruin everything if you do tell me. The other thing is, it's not really in that category. How when I come around the corner and you guys are bickering about something,
you haven't done your homework.
That has to do with homework and other kinds of stuff that you need to be responsible for. Telling me something like this, that's not in the same category. This is something that is very sensitive. It's very complicated, and I know enough to know that I have to be thoughtful about what I do with that information.
I'm glad you brought this up because as you were talking, I'm like, oh no. So it's good. But I think it can be worked into the advantage of pointing out, like you said, A, if you feel comfortable with mommy first, that's great. B, this is a different category altogether. And here's why.
Yeah. Number 3 tip is discuss the concepts of respect, consent, and gut feeling. So children clearly understand when someone has crossed a line, even someone who seems okay. Kids should also understand that they can withdraw consent at any time. They're allowed to change their minds. So, that last bit is great, but hopefully we're not at that point. I mean, I guess the consent would be, look, if someone comes to you and says, hey, I want us to go into the woods, and do you want to play a game in the woods? And let's say you agree to that. And then you get into the woods and you don't feel comfortable, or they ask you to do something in the game that involves your body in a way that is not okay. You can say, well, I didn't know this is what you were asking me to do, and I take back my consent on this game. I'm leaving right now. Because some people might actually use that against you. They say, well, remember you said you would do it, and know that you can always change your mind.
Dude, I was very susceptible to this as a younger person, just in general. The idea of like, well, I did say I was going to do blah. And so, not that, but so it wasn't all about like even sexual abuse stuff, just a lot of times where I got myself into a situation.
Like what?
Oh, as an example, invited to a trip I didn't want to go on, but at first I said I probably would go, or invited to a youth group meeting. Like for example, when I started college at UW, I got invited to this Friday night thing, and at first I didn't know what it was. I thought it was a social gathering, and I went, and it was like a Reborn Christian thing, and I didn't really want to be involved in it, but I felt committed, so I went like 1 or 2 more Fridays, but I didn't really want to go, but I felt like I need to go, but I didn't really need to go. There was no commitment, like they weren't depending on me for anything. And I used to do things like that. So
you might have been at risk if someone
someone could have taken advantage
against you,
financially or potentially even sexually, of me feeling like, well, I do owe it to this person because I said blah.
So the key when you're talking with your kids about stuff like this is there's a huge red flag to someone that wants to harm you. And that's when they actually start wanting to touch you or touching you or wanting you to take your clothes off. There are certain markers that if anyone ever asks you to do, is a huge red flag. Now, when we talk about 12-year-olds or 14-year-olds, it's easier in my book because you can actually start talking and using words like rape or sexual assault. Hopefully they have some awareness of this.
Oh man. So that's right. We just talked about this, meaning my wife and I just talked about having this conversation.
Yeah.
Because it is such a
there's going to be a
thought.
Well, there's going to be a point where your oldest, and at some point in her life, she's going to be around people that are drinking and drugging.
Totally.
And someone's going to offer her a drink, or she might even be intoxicated and someone wants to get, and maybe your daughter even likes this person.
Right.
And is impaired or peer pressure, or wants to please this person. It's the cool kid, wants to, get them to like her or something. Pretty nuanced conversation around this, right?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of examples where kids will be hurt in situations like that and have trauma that will last them the rest of their life, or will need a lot of therapy to recover from.
One of the things that I've noticed is true with both my kids, but at different levels, obviously. They're sheltered. What I mean by that is they'll say, like, there's a show that my wife and I will watch, and my daughter will be like, why can't I watch it? I'm like, it's not for you. It's like, it's a more adult show. And then she'll say, oh, but I know many kids in my class that watch that show. And I'm like, really?
Like what?
Well, as an example of Rick and Morty.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
6th graders? And this wasn't a possibility when I was in 6th grade. How would we watch something like Rick and Morty?
Yeah.
Impossible. But I'm thinking, whoa, okay. Now, so that means
for those who don't watch Rick and Morty, give an example of why that show isn't
okay. So there's a lot of explicit sexual conversations, things like eating ass, and they use a lot of euphemisms, but there's a lot of stuff, and there's
like the episode where it's the end of the world, and Rick and the older girl, the daughter, go to that world that they skip to different worlds
that's right, and they're having crazy parties, and everyone's I just want to eat so much ass.
Yeah, and Rick is just having all this sex and talking about it.
Or when he has in, I think season 1, when he has the entity, Unity, who he's having sex with tons of people that are all possessed by this entity.
And the violence is...
There's violence.
So that to me would be kind of the worst part.
6th graders in her class are watching the show, and I'm thinking, oh my God, so all that's in their brain.
Yeah.
It's not in my daughter's brain, but that transfer is not that hermetic. So I'm thinking it's a ticking time bomb here. Like,
what do you mean?
Taking time bomb in terms of information transfer and in terms of situational transfer.
Like what? What happens when the bomb goes off?
The bomb goes off. They go off on their, once a year they have their retreat where it's an overnight thing, and then conversations are happening, and a lot of those concepts get into those conversations. Mm-hmm. Or worse, some kids try to take action on things that they've seen or whatever. Right. And we haven't prepared them for that. So there's that. And even my 7-year-old, not so much on the sexual side, but we have friends whose kids who are about the same age have seen a lot of violent shows and scary shows like Stranger Things, which Stranger Things for a 7-year-old.
Yeah, no.
Are you kidding me?
No way.
Even my 12-year-old.
Even my wife.
Yeah. So like, for example, we watched Wednesday with my 12-year-old. And she was fairly freaked out at some of the scenes. She didn't go as far as having nightmares, but she was kind of freaked out. Stranger Things is too far. Like, that one's even scarier. So I'm like, I don't know. But my 7-year-old, but some of the kids apparently watch these shows.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's happening. And that's why I'm saying, like, there's an imbalance in the force.
Yeah. It's complicated. Would a child be harmed by watching these things? It's hard to tell. But it's definitely not something they need to watch, right? So to me, it's like, why take the risk?
Right.
It's better that you don't take that risk. There's plenty of other things to watch. You know what I mean? The other thing that I am often encouraging parents is your kids will be exposed to a lot of other kids.
Yeah.
No matter how freedom oriented you are with your kids, there will always be other kids with more freedoms.
Yeah.
And you will always hear from your kid, but so-and-so was allowed to. So if you gauge your parenting based on that, you're doomed. Okay, so the 4th tip here in the article is, as daunting as this might be, take time to understand the online world in which your children are interacting. This is the primary place where predators contact them. They anticipate that parents will be too busy or clueless to do much more than check in now and then. Kids who become intensely involved with individuals in online spaces might be getting baited, and a predator will encourage them to hide their relationship. Learn about the apps that offer ways to keep tabs, such as Microsoft Family Safety and Google Family Link, and attend programs offered to teach parents about internet safety. Berto, do you have anything like this on?
Yeah, I mean, well, so a couple things. The accounts that are used for communication with my older child, my 12-year-old, that is an account that is on my phone, and even though it's also on her phone, like, I see everything. Mm-hmm. And it's the Messenger Kids thing. Second,
Messenger Kids,
yeah.
Facebook Messenger Kids. Yeah. And she has a Facebook account?
She has an account that she can use on Facebook Messenger Kids only.
And Messenger Kids, does it have like words that you can't send to each other?
Yeah, and
like they're
you
banned.
Can't just befriend someone randomly.
And it bans certain words, or the words will flag the...
I think it's just filtered out or something like that.
Okay.
And
you
again,
have access.
I see everything.
Yeah.
Now, we've also had the conversation.
For the 12-year-old too?
Well, only the 12-year-old. The 7-year-old doesn't have this.
Yeah.
But we've had the conversation explicitly about online
Because I'm guessing your 12-year-old's like, there are other kids who can freely text without
probably
oversight. Yeah. She hasn't said anything like that?
No.
Okay.
For now, she's a rule follower like her mom was. Honestly, kind of like I was too. Hopefully it stays that way. We'll see. And by a rule follower, I mean
your 7-year-old is not going to follow.
No, I know. Because when I was a kid, like I was the kid you actually didn't have to worry with those kinds of things. Like I wasn't trying to figure out the edge cases.
Yeah, me neither.
There was something I was going to say earlier, because you were saying that, hey, there might be a plus for some of my older kids' friends seeing her as maybe someone who's, not as aware of a lot of, because I actually was like that in high school, and later found out that I was excluded from some pretty chaotic activities that would have been dangerous thanks to that.
Yeah, I think I was kind of that way too. Yeah. I think I talked about this in a rerun when we were talking about Lance Armstrong, in which years and years later I found out that pretty much everyone on my football team, my teammates, I was captain of the football team.
Right.
Meaning that I was heavily involved. I was seen as a leader, meaning that I knew all the players and developed relationships with everyone. And I learned years and years later that all of them were using steroids and hadn't even offered it to me because they knew I wouldn't take it.
All of them. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, not every single.
Sure, but it was very
there's like 100 kids on the team, but all the ones that were starters who were close to me, you know what I mean?
Oh, actually, and we've talked about this before. This extended into my adulthood. Like all some of our mutual friends that would be into like certain kinds of drugs.
Oh yeah.
For the longest time, they would pretend it wasn't happening and keep it away from me.
Yeah, me too. Some of the same friends. Yeah. They would be doing cocaine, for example, or ecstasy, along with us. They would just go to the back. They wouldn't even offer it to us because they knew we wouldn't take it. Because we were high on life, man. Let's take a break and let's go do our drugs. And we come back. Let's do the tip, the fifth tip. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. So do you have an app on their phone? Because they have. The 12-year-old, she has a browser on her phone, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, but it's restricted. So the phone she got the phone at 11, and it is an Apple phone, and it's got a child account, and it has restricted apps.
What does that mean?
Meaning that you can't search just for anything, and you can't actually go to any website. There's only certain types of websites you can access.
Yeah. Now, I worked with a lot of kids when these measures started to become implemented in the aughts and the teens, and they would tell me there were ways around that sort of stuff.
Oh, I'm sure.
So do you ever worry about that?
I do. Again, I haven't yet noticed leaks in the system from the perspective of like her trying to circumvent things, but you never know. And plus when they go over to a friend's house, like, I don't know what their internet situation. I had a thought the other day. I don't know if they've got guns in the house. I don't know what their internet situation is.
Yeah.
There's so much I don't know.
Yeah.
And I feel awkward. For example, I feel awkward going to a parent and saying, hey, my child is... Why do I feel awkward? But I do. Hey, my child's coming over to your house on Friday. Can I just ask you some questions?
Yeah. So here, and I know you know this, but here are the options. The parent is so offended that they're like, screw you.
Right.
And I never want to talk to you again. Then it's like, well, good riddance.
Yeah.
The other option is they're mildly offended, but they go along with it, and so be it. But in all likelihood, they'll be like, oh my God, I was worrying about the same thing. Can we share? Do you have guns? And Berto, you're like, no, there's no gun. And they say, we don't have guns either. And you learn to trust each other. You know that you're, or if they do have a gun, it's locked up properly, all that kind of stuff. So worrying about hurting other people's feelings or worrying about it being awkward is the fertile soil in which not only just general risk to children takes place, but also sexual exploitation.
Yeah, totally.
And you model it for your kids too. Literally right in front of the girls, right in front of your 12-year-old and their friends. You'd be like, so let's talk about home safety.
Yeah.
Everybody. who has a gun? Does anyone have a gun?
Right.
Let's talk about it, because then you model for the kids. Look, it's okay to talk about.
That's a great idea, man. It's funny because I do that with so many things. Like I just like shining the light of the day onto things. Why am I know why. It's culture, it's society, but it's so weird, especially because I'm so paranoid about my kids. Why would I just leave things up to chance?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. You've been in denial.
Sure.
Like you've been until now when we're shining the light on it. You're like, it'll never happen.
Well, no, actually it's worse than that. Just the other day I was thinking about some of these things and thinking, because I got to tell you, when my first child was younger, there were often times where she stayed at places, just at a place that I know very well and with people I know very well, where I was still very paranoid. But now, where it's more common that she'll go over to a friend's house, right? It's places I've never been to, and it's conversations I haven't explicitly had. And I was thinking about this the other day. I'm like, what? Why? Like, what's stopping me from having those conversations? Awkward? Like that shit. So yeah, I'm committing right now to stopping this silliness.
By doing what?
By auditing everyone's houses, coming in with microscopes and black lights.
Well, what does that look like? Because there
kidding.
are parents listening. So
No. I'm actually going to do. I like your example. First of all, I know these parents. I do know the parents. So I like the idea. I might even give them a heads up ahead of time. Be like, hey, I want to have the following conversation, and actually in front of the girls, so that they basically what we were just saying. And the kinds of parents that might say, "Ooh, that's weird. I don't want to do that." I might start having second thoughts about at least allowing my child blindly to go over to that place.
Oh my God, yes.
Right?
I mean, that is tip of the iceberg for another parent to whatever factors are like either they don't give a crap,
right,
or they're hiding something, or they just are scared in general about broaching any kind of topic, even overt kind of quote unquote safe topics like guns or heavy machinery in a house. Like that is a massive red flag for that is not a safe parent that you can leave your kids with. I mean, a parent who can't just have a conversation. Imagine
if we could change the culture so parents are always able to have these conversations, even the bathing suit area conversations, right?
Well, so yeah, the other thing I'll throw out there, I don't know if you do this with your kids, with your 12-year-old, is to literally just watch what they're doing online, to just be in their presence. Kids want to be around their parents. Not all 12-year-olds want to be around their parents all the time, but generally kids like if you have a good relationship. So and as long as you're not breathing down their neck or what are you doing on that side, jumping down their throat. But if you're just around, because the typical stuff that a 12-year-old wants to look at is pretty mundane stuff, Well, what does your 12-year-old, do you think, look at online?
She's like, first of all, obviously there's school stuff, but she's very into things like art related and animals, like looking at narwhals or foxes.
So the chance that your kid would be upset if you were just casually observing as she was browsing that would be pretty low. Also, if she were bothered, that's a red flag. Yeah, especially at that age. Now, she's heading into an age when she's going to expect
some amount of privacy,
internet privacy, and perhaps full reign to the full internet, right? So when do you make that transition, do you think?
Yeah, 35 at least.
So number 5 tip, realize that grooming often starts in the presence of parents in order to normalize it for the targeted child. Katz and Burnett's 2015 study investigated grooming in a sample of 95 children 5 to 13 years old. They found that 68% of victims reported that their abuser had manipulated their family members, and predators can be female as well. Be careful of assumptions. Yeah. Right. So this is
totally true.
The Larry Nassar comes to mind, the trainer for the American Olympic team. He was beloved by not only the gymnasts but also the parents,
and would abuse with the parents just behind a slight curtain.
Or literally right there.
Yeah.
Because he would hide his hands. Because he, in his medical procedures, it involved a lot of stretching of legs and
hip manipulation.
Stretching. And he would be sexually assaulting these children right as the parents are sitting right there. And so do not assume that just because these things are done right in front of you that they couldn't possibly be sexually exploitative or grooming. Yeah. Now, the more common examples are that the abuser will groom the child while the parents are there, and counting on, or maybe inadvertently counting on, the child feeling like, well, if my parents are in the room, then it must be okay, and my parents must be okay with this then. And then the groomer will transition to isolation. It'll be, if the abuser just went straight to isolation, the kid would know, wait, there's something wrong here. But if they do all these interim things in the presence of the parents, then it makes the jump to isolation a lot easier, and the child will not necessarily see it as a massive leap to the abuse. So it's important to note that. The best defense you have against all of this is if your kid knows their boundaries and knows how to protect themselves. They can, one, say, no, I don't want to, or at the first sign or of an indication, they can come to you. And maybe your kid is overly paranoid and you're like, well, actually, when your coach was demonstrating how to stretch and I was sitting right there, that I'm glad you told me. Yeah. I mean, God bless you. What a great kid you are that you did that. But I'll keep an eye on it. But it didn't look like it didn't look like someone who was trying to hurt you. It just looked like stretching. It looked like he was demonstrating how to stretch. Yeah. Now, if he was touching you in a way, even if it was stretching, and even if it wasn't sexual in that way, if you didn't want to do it, then by all means say, I don't want to do it, and we can talk about that. And I can go to the coach and say, don't do it with my daughter. So let's talk about, so worst case scenario, your kid is telling you way too much, Right. In fact, that would be the gauge, really, is if your kid is telling you about occasional moments where you look into it or know that it wasn't an example of grooming or exploitation or sexually, harming to the child, and your kid is telling you about things occasionally along those lines, then you know that you've done your job. In fact, one of the strategies that I've used with some kids is actually setting up a situation where you have the kid, you prescribe the kid telling you something as a parent, even when everyone understands nothing happened. It'd be like, so the next time someone touches you, even though we know that it, say your friend just holds your hand or a teacher taps you on the head to say good job. The next time someone touches your body, I want you to tell me. Not because we're going to say that's a time when you were being hurt, but I just want to practice what this is like. And I want to show you that when you tell me about this, I'm not going to flip out. We're going to have a conversation.
That's interesting.
And I'll ask you, okay, so your teacher patted you on the back when you did a good job on your math test and so you're saying she came up to you and said, good job, and she tapped you on the shoulder. So let me ask you some questions. Did you feel hurt by that? No, I didn't feel hurt. Okay. Did you feel uncomfortable with it? Did it feel like something didn't feel right about it? No, it felt fine. Were there other people around? Yeah, everyone was around. Okay. Do you want me to do anything about it? No, I don't want you to do anything about it. Okay. You run through the questions and you're like, okay, then we're good. That was an example of consensual touching that was completely fine. You run through a practice run.
Why did Daddy take you out of the school? Oh, he told me that to tell him when my teacher touched my head and...
Well, I mean,
he freaked out.
You can tell the teacher, by the way, I'm running a program with my kid that I want to have a practice. So, you can even tell the teacher, look, I want you to tap my kid on the head, because then they're going to tell me about it, and we're going to practice what that is like. This isn't to sue you. I just
know I'm going to end up in jail. And like, what happened, Berto? I was following instructions.
What do you mean?
I'm just kidding. I'll just go too far with everything.
What do you mean? What would you do?
I'll be like, all right, I want you to, as you're walking down the street, anytime anyone looks 45 degrees close to your direction,
you're going to punch him in the face. So here, I thought at the end here I would provide some signs that your kid is being abused, not just tips on what to do preemptively, and it's really hard because the common tips, the common signs are so broad, like depression, mood swings, non-suicidal self-injury, cutting, suicidal ideation, anxiety, nightmares, sleep problems, urinating in bed, triggered by touch. This one is more indicative, right?
By the way, all of the ones you've listed so far, I didn't have any of those.
Right. Triggered by their own body. Like they don't want to look at their body or they don't want to talk about their body. Their play might involve themes of abuse. So there are there are some things that are really huge red flags, like the fact that you reached down that girl's pants, the fact that you wrote a note in the second grade saying, let's make love.
Yeah.
These are huge red flags.
Right.
Because now it's not an indication automatically, but at the very least, it's an indication the child has been exposed to things, at least verbally, that is probably not a good idea that the kid was exposed to.
By the way, there was another instance, which I've talked about before, where my dad and I and the family of the girl and my other little friend, I think it was just the family of the girl, we were on a vacation together. We were like, let's take a shower. And I was like, I want to take a shower. We can take a shower together. And I was announcing it to the parents. And she was obviously like...
Meaning you were saying, I want to take a shower with a 13-year-old girl that was abusing you.
Right. But of course, I was just saying it as like, I want to take a shower. And the parents didn't think it was a good idea. So they shut it down. But I didn't understand why.
Yeah.
But it's another interesting thing. It's like, that's interesting.
But that would be a red flag.
Right. So that coupled with all the other little signals.
Because it's not common for a 5-year-old to want to shower with a 13-year-old. You know, if it were... Now, would it be a huge red flag? No, because 5-year-olds might say because, some 5-year-olds, especially bath time, they might feel like, this is fun time where we got to play with toys in the bathtub. And they might bathe with their older sister or something. So but a shower might be a little different.
This was a little different. And I kept insisting.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. So that should have raised a red flag for some further conversations, right? If a child is very secretive and quiet, but again, these are all things that a lot of kids will have, and I have seen way too many clinicians assume that any one of these things indicates that they, I don't know if it's so much now, but in the past, I would be in consultations with other therapists and they would have a kid that was depressed or anxious or urinating in a bed. And there would be people in the consultation that would just say, the kid's being sexually abused.
Right. They would pull a Dr. Drew.
Just, yeah, exactly. There'd be no question.
Right.
And I wouldn't be in a position of power. So I would just internally kind of scoff at them of just like, my God, it's possible for sure, but you are on a witch hunt you got some issues that you're still working out.
Yeah.
Should you investigate? Yeah. But is it automatically an indication of that? No. But the main red flag, like I said, is sexualized behavior in general that we talked about. If you hear them talking about their genitals or other people's genitals or using language that is not age appropriate, talking about sex a lot, touching their genitals a lot, these are red flags. Not automatic. There's some kids who just pick up on things or make up stuff, but that's a pretty big red flag. The bigger point here is we do not want to be in a zone where we're trying to see signs. We want to be in a zone where there's an open line of communication between your kid and you. Yeah. Because if that's present, then you can be pretty assured that they will tell you, and or if you ask, they would tell you, right?
Right.
Often these conversations around, like, what's the sign of a kid being sexually abused? We've already lost.
Yeah, it's the whole, like, let's treat your symptoms you're already having instead of how to eat healthy and have good exercise and sleep.
And of course, teenagers will exhibit other kinds of very similar broad behaviors: drug use, school problems, isolations, isolating themselves, eating disorder, hypersexuality, that kind of thing. But again, hopefully from day one, you have cultivated an open line of communication and a non-stigmatizing language style with your kids regarding their bodies and sexuality, age appropriate, of course, so that they can tell you, and or if you see any of these signs, you can say, hey, could we talk about how you doing, and have an in-depth conversation, and I just was a little worried about you, and if there's anything you want to tell me, or hey, I don't know, but I'm your dad and I worry sometimes about someone touching you or hurting you. I don't want to assume anything, but I've heard other stories where some kids feel like they can't tell their dad about this. And I just want, can I ask you if it would help me? I'm worried about you. So it'd really help me to sleep better at night if you could answer this question in whatever way is truthful to you. I feel like I just need to know, has anyone ever touched you in a way that made you feel uncomfortable? Has anyone ever hurt you or said things like, I will touch you and don't tell your dad about it? Or, can you tell me if anything's, and if it has happened, let's talk about it. I'm not going to flip out, but I just need to know,
opening those doors.
Yeah. And again, since when they're 5, you're having occasional conversations along these lines. When they're 7, when they're 9, and you build that culture. If you build that culture into the family and the expectations, kids won't know that this is weird. Kids get stigma from us. Yeah. They see us enacting stigma and will thus internalize that stigma. But if you don't have that stigma around these conversations,
they don't know where to learn that from. Yeah.
They're just like, let's talk about it. Yeah. They don't have any hangups around that, right? So, age appropriateness, again, is complicated, but having those conversations are important, because why do we have these conversations with kids, Berto?
Because they deserve it.
Because what's the outcome? What are we hoping for?
We're hoping that they know about their own boundaries, and then they're empowered to talk and get assistance from the people that can help them. Yeah. And that they grow up with less trauma.
Right. We're trying to prevent them from being traumatized.
Yeah.
If someone touched them inappropriately and it doesn't traumatize them, it's not great, but that's not as concerning as if a child is traumatized by something, even if they don't know they're being traumatized. You didn't know you were being traumatized at age 5. You don't want kids to learn lessons that say that their bodies are other people's objects, or that their bodies aren't their own, or their bodies are disgusting, or that they can't trust other people, or they can't trust themselves, or they're dirty. These are lessons that people will learn when they are exploited in these ways. They deserve to be exploited is another lesson that people will have. There must be something about me that makes me exploitable because people exploit me and they don't exploit other people. I must deserve this. These are lessons that you do not want kids developing.
Nope.
Having things happen is something that is a risk. We as parents can never get rid of all risk. Yeah. But if you have preemptive things in advance, it will help them in the moment potentially. But even then, let's just get real here. You could have the best approach with your kids. Let's just get specific with your kid. I hate to do this to you, bro. You could do everything in your power to help your kid and equip them. And your oldest daughter could be raped at the age of 16 at a party.
Yep.
And that is awful. But the damage can be massively mitigated if she felt like she could go to you and others and your wife and talk about it and begin the healing process. When people are assaulted in these ways or exploited or coerced, there's the trauma of the moment. And then there's the trauma of the way everyone reacts after.
Yeah.
There's the trauma of the way families react. There's the trauma of the way friends react. There's the trauma of the way some of these people are labeled sluts and that sort of thing. There's the trauma of going to the police and how they react, right? So we have the power to take away the risk of that trauma after the fact, which sometimes can be most of the trauma, honestly. Yeah. Or at the very least, the biggest factor in recovery. We go through bad experiences, like with you, when you were sexually abused as a child, the effects lasted until you were able to process it.
Right.
Which was 20, 30 years later.
Yeah.
If you were able to process it right afterwards, if your dad would have been probably the most likely person and said, hey, let's talk about that. And it goes age appropriate and maybe revisits it age 7, age 9, age 7. You might not have needed much or any therapy at all once you were older. So it's not that we're trying to prevent anything from happening, but we are trying to prevent the things that happen to our kids having 10 times the trauma and the effect than would otherwise be there if we actually had a venue and a platform upon which we could help them recover quickly from the events like this.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Because, imagine if you're there for your kids and you're just like, as those thoughts start to creep into their head that they deserve it or there's something wrong with them or the world can't be trusted, if you're right there and to be like, let's talk about that, because I could understand how you go down that road, but that's not the case, and it was not your fault.
Yeah.
So it's their fault. They are a criminal. There's something wrong with them. Here's what we can do to prevent this in the future, and let's talk about it. But the chance that people are out there just waiting to pounce on you, it's just not quite high. It's not high. There are signs that we can look for in future individuals. There are venues that people are more likely to harm you.
Yeah.
But you can still trust me. You can still trust your teachers in all likelihood. You can trust your friends. You can trust family members. That one person was strange, and there's nothing wrong with you.
Right.
Zero wrong with you. You're not tainted. You're not broken. You were harmed. A criminal act happened to you. You were violated. And there's a path to recovery. Let's have you talk to some other victims. I can talk about my own victim. Let's let's talk about it. Let's get it out there. There's nothing wrong with it. Hashtag me too. You know what I mean?
It occurs to me, like, we don't even do this, honestly, with even non-sexual stuff. As an example, like I'm looking back, when I was 14, I hit my head pretty hard and I had stitches and all these things. And it was pretty traumatic for me.
When you jumped down the stairs?
Yeah. But we never really talked about it. And I certainly didn't have any therapy about it or anything. And it occurs to me, like, that would have been helpful. And that's, quote unquote, a minor thing, but it's because I was going to go the other route with my comment. I was going to say, yeah, because, oftentimes bad things happen to us as we're growing up. Like, we'll hit ourselves, we'll scrape our knees, we'll do other things. But then I realized, and we never even talk about those things. Usually it's just like, especially, as a little boy, a lot of the emphasis is like, toughen up, stand up, right. No crying,
God,
right?
Kill me.
And part of it is, of course, certainly you don't want someone that, just because you slightly bump your hand, you're like, right? Okay, fair enough. But the flip side is, like, you're never supposed to show emotion, process the damage, do anything.
Right. That's the heuristic.
Yeah.
Is a complaining child is a histrionic, overreacting child. And so you get into this mode as a parent of just like, hey, shut up and deal with it. Because, kids complain about the dumbest shit.
Right.
My sister looked at my pizza. I don't want to eat it anymore. And you're just like, my God, kids, will you just fucking eat the pizza? Like, really? Every day, every meal, or every time you're in the back seat together, is constant complaining. And,
well, to be fair, the
sister's
photons...
touching me. She touched me. It's like, work it out amongst yourselves. You get in this mode of just like...
But the photons bouncing off the pizza, landing in the sister's eye, can change the taste of it.
Yeah. She put her eye photons on my pizza, and it's disgusting now. And you get in this mode, especially if you're overstressed, right? And you're burnt out as a parent.
Right.
And then they come around and they tell you something along these lines, like they hit their head or...
Yeah, well, I just got to toughen up.
Yeah, and what message are we sending our kids, telling our kids that when we do that to them?
Right.
That what if it's something more complicated and more questionable, like they were assaulted at school or at a friend's house? They know that they're not supposed to complain.
Yeah, so that was what made me, in the moment, catch myself. I was going to say, well, yeah, because we at least process things like scraped knees, but actually we don't, let alone really terrible things.
Right.
Yeah.
And we might find that when we actually pay attention and process and let it breathe, when a kid is complaining about something that is at least possibly legit, because, kids will complain about some bullshit things.
Right.
But when they are complaining about legitimate things and we really pay attention to them, there's a chance that they will not complain about the bullshit things. It's possible that they're complaining in general because they don't feel heard in general.
Yeah.
Because we tend to look down on kids, particularly of a certain age. We'll just be like, it's just constant complaining, constant needs, just be quiet. Can't you just be quiet and just live your life? I don't complain to you about every little thing. You know what I mean? There's this attitude of just like, get off my back.
So with my little one, she, I used to make her quesadillas sometimes for breakfast, it's like, and one day I make her quesadillas. She's like, oh, I hate quesadillas. And I'm like, when did this start happening? I've always hated quesadillas. What? No, you don't. Because she's like, yes, I've never liked quesadillas. I'm like, oh my God. And it's like a shift from one day to the next. So yeah.
Right. So there are situations like that. And if you're late for work and you have
you're going to eat the quesadilla.
Well, you're going to eat it because I don't care if you hate it because I don't have time to make something else. And literally this morning I asked you if you wanted a quesadilla and you said yes. So, we'll talk about this another time.
Well, you have the wrong kind of tortilla.
Yeah.
That's not the cheese I like.
Yeah. So, there's always that with kids. And you always have to gauge, is this a legit situation or is this something where they're just playing around with complaining or they're playing around with having their own free will? Because that as soon as kids are old enough to exert their free will, they start exerting it, and often it's against you.
Yeah.
They define their free will as whatever you don't want them to do.
Daddy, a black widow bit me where the cat scratched my eye. I mean, come on.
You'll see that look in a 2-year-old's eye when they are able to walk and they can finally walk away from you. When you're at the mall or something, they're 3 and they get that look in their eye like, I'm gonna bolt around the corner, and you're thinking someone's gonna steal you and murder you, or you're gonna get run over by a car.
Right.
But the kid doesn't know that. All they think of is
fun.
This is fun. I have the power to run through Target.
Right.
And my parent has to chase me, and they will. And this is fun. And so, every age, 13, I get to go to a party and smoke a cigarette because that's what makes me feel like I have an individual personality and I'm me and I'm not my parents. I am me. I have an identity. So sometimes that manifests in, I don't want to eat your fucking quesadilla because I've always hated quesadillas because I'm an individual, Daddy, and you don't know me. Okay. I know me. You think you know me, but I know me.
You think you know me.
And so sometimes as a parent, you're just like, I know you. You're just playing a game. Yes. Will you please knock it out? So, it's complicated, and I guess, I don't know if I've thought about it this way, but when parents are not burnt out, they probably will have the mental capacity to notice when there's a legit complaint coming and will have energy and time to actually listen. So I think the key is burnout, right? The key is that you're not overly stressed and overly worked. Because if you are, it's going to be really hard to slow down and listen. So that's another tip that I might add here is get your shit together as a human being. Let's say you have all the best conversations with your kid and you're on top of it, but you're overly stressed, your life is in shambles, and it has nothing to do with your kids. It's just your job or your personal life, whatever. And your kid will notice my parent is struggling. My parent has a lot on their plate, and I don't want to be an additional burden on my parent. So,
dude, and this is a matter of privilege because, I'm actually thinking back, like, my dad in New York City, in Queens, only parent, doing his whatever you call it, residency as a psychiatrist or whatever, which takes up all your time, delegating some of my custodial time to a daughter of a friend or whatever, right? Like, and having very little time where he's not stressed. And it's like, so it's like compounding.
Did you get that sense that you didn't want to burden him at all?
No, not explicitly. I'm just saying that on top of everything else, I remember him being stressed. And so implicitly, I bet you I was. I just don't remember, thinking that.
At the very least, it possibly impaired his ability to detect what babysitters should be.
Well, of course, dude. I do have the memories of us rushing all the time and him being stressed and him being like, oh, I'm going to be late. And just that sense of, barely making ends meet and, what am I going to do? I honestly, I think back and I now as a parent, I don't know how to deal with a little 5-year-old by myself. That seems overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned privilege, because there can be contextual problems that can lead to this that people don't have any control over. What I'll say is that for your benefit, but also for the benefit of not giving the message to your kids that they shouldn't overburden you, is to prioritize having a life in which you have enough mental, emotional capacity to have a chill, open door to your kids to burden you with whatever they feel like they need to burden you with.
Yeah.
All right, Berto, long conversation. I hope everyone out there
got something from it.
Yeah. And
some tools.
Comment below with your own tips, with your own thoughts. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because
you deserve it.